I haven't done one of these in a while, so I thought it might be time to dust off the old test bench and do a case review. Good afternoon and welcome to Turbo Tortoise Tech. Our case study today is going to be the 220T. Corsair's kind of taken what they've learned from their Crystal series and then made a whole bunch of different cases that are almost the same but also slightly different. And this one is pretty much one of the best RGB enabled, full fan kit ones that they do make, at least on paper. So I thought, let me grip one from the Evetech storeroom and then do a review for you guys and see if I'm on the money or if I'm smoking Turk. So let us start now at the beginning, now that the case is on and you can see that RGB and everything cool that I was talking about. There you go. That can be connected to your software in case you were wondering, and then you can control it from there. I've just left it on the full RGB mode because it just looks really nice and I do quite like full RGB modes. But you get the 3 included fans in the kit, and that sits behind a mesh panel, which is you can literally just pull the front of this off. If I can get my finger inside, there we go. You pull off the front of the case like that, and then you can access the mesh from there. There's a little pull-out tab, and it's magnetically attached to the case. So very well thought out, typically Corsair. Now, while there is a full 360mm rad worth of support at the front of the case, you are going to need to remove the hard drive cage in order to use it. And honestly, this build, just based on the dimensionings and having this GPU in here, is better suited to this sort of setup for a pretty mid to high range kind of air cooling setup. It can house water cooling. There is space at the front, but I wouldn't suggest anything more than a 240. And if you're not using a mini GPU that's about 250mm in length, well, you're going to run into the problems that you see here, where there just isn't enough clearance to put a full push-pull. On top, you'll find 2 more 120mm bays and then another adjustable 120 at the back, something I do quite like to have so that you can separate it a little bit from the other fans on top and make sure that they're all getting the maximum out of the airflow potential. Glass side panel, power supply shroud at the bottom. You can see through the top of it. It has had mesh put in it. So if you want to include the PSU's cooling as part of your cooling loop, you can, albeit it is better to mount it facing down because, one, there is a mesh that's been installed over here. It's actually got a clip on it this time. It doesn't just slide out. So there is a bottom facing mesh for it. And honestly, then you just isolate that whole track of heat and dissipation into the power supply and into the basement itself. And to aid with airflow, they've also put it up on feet. So there is some clearance for the air to get in underneath the machine. Moving inside the case, you do get 2 5¼ bays with the quick release systems on them. Those are absolutely fantastic because they toolless designs. And then there are 2 2.5-inch bays on the back of the motherboard for normal 2.5 SSDs. I think the idea with this sort of case is to have like maybe one of each Nvme 2.5 and then maybe 2 4 TV drives. If you were so inclined, then you could set all of that up in here. But it just makes it angled even more towards that sort of mid to high level. The layout internally is also really nicely done. I especially like having the Garrett at the bottom over here. So if you've got like a shorter GPU, then you could route your cables through that up through the bottom and it will look quite neat and also prevent any tension from pulling that down and causing GPU sag. The Garretts on the side as well are absolutely perfect. They're nice and soft, so they wrap around the cables pretty easily. They don't leave big gaping holes in it, so you do get a very clean looking finish along with that. Now, right in the middle of that back panel, you are going to notice Corsair's proprietary RGB controller, which then goes with a USB into the motherboard and then you control it from there. It does require SATA power to function as well, but the really nice thing is all of the 3-pin fan connectors are individual. I would have liked something to daisy chain them perhaps into a single port, but with a motherboard like this, for instance, which is once again more on the mid to high end spectrum, there are more than enough fan headers to be able to control all of that from the motherboard. I also quite like all the rings that they've put around the back of the motherboard over there because it's obviously great for cable tying stuff onto, and the back panel you're seeing now has literally 2 cable ties holding everything in place, and it's still pretty neat. I didn't go super overkill on it because I wanted to show what you could do front facing wise, without having to go to extremes with cable ties. But if you are pedantic like that and you do want it to look really nice and clean, there are plenty of rings in all the right places for you to tie those onto. Now obviously I built the test bench machine into it, and it's a very easy, straightforward build. RAM, motherboard, processor, all permanently connected to each other pretty much all the time, and then I just handled from the CPU cooler itself there to get it into place. One thing that was nice is the central screw is one of those standoff types that has a little lip on it, so when the motherboard moves into position it locks onto that, and that makes it fastening it down just that much easier. About the only problem that I had actually was getting the PSU in. This is a little bit of a longer PSU, being an 850 watt high current gamer. So this is really the limit of what I would say you should put in a case. So if you want references for that, just look for an 850 watt high current gamer from Antec, and then you'll know exactly what your expected or maximum PSU length would be. Now of course the case has got two roles here. One is to hold all of the components and everything together so that you can use it as a computer. The other part of it is to keep the components cool. So with the default fan kit in the system, without adding anything else into it, thanks boy tank, without adding anything else into it, I'm tested it as it is like this. Once again, I've tested on the open air test bench versus this, and that's what you're going to see with the scores that I'm showing in front of you. So one was a full 30 minutes ASUS test, and that's basically like as if you're rendering through GPU and CPU simultaneously to try and create as much heat as humanly possible. And then I did a bit more of what I would consider a real world test, where I have Firmware and Cinebench running, because those are practically applications that are doing rendering. Now, the one thing I am a little bit limited by is the fact that the componentry and stuff and the cooling that exists on it is actually, well, somewhat really well put together and made. So it doesn't actually make the most temperature EU. But if you're looking at something like this, there's normally going to be some difference between the two. And as you'll see by the scores on your screen in front of you, things were very, very much close to one another. It is a little bit warm at the moment in Johannesburg. It's been heating up as we are entering into our spring and summertime. Today is a bit more overcast, so that's why I chose today to do this, because I thought, let me get more of a median point, because it was like nearly 28 degrees here a few days ago, and today is more comfortable 23, 24, which is like an average, let's say, globally for like a hotter day. It can hit like 35 to 40 here in Johannesburg. These things have happened. But the bullet point of the presentation is, even without extraction, even with just the fans coming in, there's enough airflow that the componentry didn't get any hotter than normal, especially when you look at things like memory on the GPU. That's a bit of a hot spot, hitting at a very, very toasty 80 degrees. This is kind of a norm for memory on GPUs, and they do tend to get quite a bit hotter, but this kept it just as cool as if it was on the open air. There was nothing to aid the open air, it was just chilling on the test bench, as I showed you earlier. In conclusion then, Corsair's put together a really nice little budget case. Well, budget, I'd say this is budget premium because you're getting that RGB fan kit. I would still say that when you're going into the 35-degree heats, you are going to want to have some extraction. But even as it stands just like this, I can actually feel airflow coming out the back of the case. I do attribute that somewhat to the Hyper 212 being a fantastic cooler, but even on top here, where it couldn't possibly be creating airflow, I can actually feel from the front side of the case that these fans are pushing in nicely. And because they're all controlled by the board, you would expect them to ramp up when the CPU, GPU warmed up to aid with that. I didn't hear them. I never heard it. It never changed. It's exactly the same. It's been exactly the same on exactly the same profile, like as far as speed and noise and all of that sort of stuff goes, as it is right now. And standing next to it, I can hear it if I put my ear there. If I'm this far away from it, it's a very pleasant time. There's no way you're going to hear it. Even if you're sitting playing on speakers or something like that, you're not going to hear the fan kit, especially if it's not ramping up and going absolutely tilt. I personally quite like the way it looks as well. I really like what they've done with the front panel, which is why I selected this one, because I like that look and feel and all of that sort of stuff, and it's not going to interfere with airflow. And if anybody has been watching the channel for a little bit of time, you know that I'm obsessed with airflow to the point that I'll literally drill holes in the case to make it better. So basically the bullet point of my presentation is, if you like the way it looks and you don't have a ridiculously sized GPU and you're happy with like a Hyper 212 or Antec A400 as like a cooling tower kind of option, then this is going to be absolutely perfect for you. You don't need to add in any fans. I still would suggest that you do, just because things will get hotter as we go into summer, and just having extraction there is going to be good. One thing I will say though is I don't think you should fill up the fan slot. I honestly think you only need 2 over here and over here. Reason being is something that I discovered when I was doing integration. We used to build like kiosk machines. You probably maybe use one of them if you go to like Gateway or to Eastgate here in Johannesburg or something. It looks like a giant iPhone. The problem with those units was actually ventilation and airflow. And the machine started to have not the greatest time of it. But what we discovered with that is if you have actually too much airflow, then the air doesn't have time to like warm up and actually do its job to get hot and then take the heat away. It sounds really weird when you say it like that, I know, but it just was the case. And having more in than out also creates static pressure. So if you've got more in, then it's going to push dust away from it because there's more air going in, right? Air, you got to think about it. It's not something you can see or touch, but it has mass, it has density. And this is exemplified by all of the developments in racing cars and all of that sort of stuff for aerodynamics, because once you get to a certain speed, it's about 250 kilometers if memory serves, then it has the same density as a fruitcake standing still. Okay, so the air density actually doesn't make a difference there. And it's the same sort of principle here. More in and out is always the better way to do things. Anyway, that is all I have for you in this review. If you have enjoyed it, please hit us up with a like and subscribe, and I will see you on the flip side. Also, we turn the mic on. Usually, if you're trying to make a video with audio, then if you turn the mic on, then you get both. Imagine